You have produce and consume, mine, that limit what requests, which requests will trigger a call to the annotated method. And here's an example that mixes all of those together. We're producing text HTML. We're consuming a form URL encoded, so this is something that's been submitted from a web page. If I try to go there via a link or try to go there with something else, posting some XML to it instead of the form, then it's not going to work. It's not going to call this method. And it automatically translates the URL encoded form into a specific object. We'll get into that later, how it does that. And I process it and spit out a string. Now, I'm not always going to spit out a string. And probably for most apps, it's a bad idea to have string be your return type. But it's a lot easier to look at it this way from the start. Injection. We can inject things into a method using query param, URI param, HTTP context, or a header param. And here's a example. If we have a template that specifies a specific portion of the template as being ISBN, we can inject that URI param into the method. We can also inject a query param. This would be if you had your URL that ended with $numpage equals 3. It would give you 3 pages, or it would give you page 3, depending on what you're doing here. URI info is just an object that lets you look at things in the URI path. That can be injected into your method, so you can change your response based on that. And a header param, for example, if I want only to answer Apache or certain clients, I could do that here. Any type of parameter in the header of the HTTP request you can look at here. Transformations. Transformations are when we change the incoming and outgoing streams to Java objects. Jersey does it through an interface called the entity provider, which has 3 methods: one to write to a stream, one to read from a stream, and another to specify what classes are available. I don't have any custom entity providers in the example, but I can show you. Well, actually, this term resource is a good example. No, that's not. Example number 2. That's a good example of one, where we're maybe adding a member. In this case, you have the form URL encoded properties that gets passed in. This is what really comes to the browser, or comes to the server as a string, and that gets translated into this object by an entity provider. There's a standard set of entity providers that are in every JSR 311 implementation. And what they are and what types of MIME types that they translate are listed here. You can have a generic byte array, a string, an input stream, a file, a data source, a source. I believe that's for XSL. JAX-B element. If you're mapping any of your classes to XML via JAX-B, you can have them automatically translated to and from here. Or a multi-value map, which is really a fancy hash map for URL encoded, form URL encoded streams. They also have, although it's not in the JSR spec, Jersey provides ones for JSON and for Atom, if you want to do an RSS feed, and several others. I actually have an example of that. We want to see example 3. Example 2 and example 3 are just copies of example 1 with an added feature. You'll see the differences. So example 3 has an additional URL here instead of getting all the meetings here, you can get all the meetings by adding /RSS to the URI, and you get an RSS feed. I'll show you that with Internet Explorer, because they have a nice built-in RSS reader. Members. Here's the meetings. You notice when I went to go to this page, it lit up the live bookmarks. If I click on that, I get an RSS feed of all the meetings that I can click on and link directly back to them. How that's done is, in the meeting resource, I have a get all meetings as RSS. Using the Atom library, just build it programmatically from the data model. Now, I initially did not want to have a separate URL for the RSS. We should be able to request this and just say, hey, give me this, and my type is application / I believe it's Atom plus XML, and I don't need a separate one. And it turns out that Internet Explorer will even when it knows that it's a live bookmark, which is what they call their RSS feeds, it says that it will accept text HTML, and it says that that's one of the ones it requests, and that's given preference when it's sent to it. So a bug in IE kept me from making this, I don't want to call it pure REST, because it wasn't even close to that, but it moved me even further away from that. There's another.
So otherwise, you said you could have just overloaded the method.
Overload the URI, not the method.
So different method signatures and URI templates with
Right.
different.
And what I would do here is just, here's the get all meetings, and notice that there's no URI template. I would just leave this out. And that should work. And I bet you it would work if I went and got a standalone feed reader that didn't try to send HTML or didn't try to accept HTML. That would probably work. But that wasn't in the demo.
It still needs to be a different. It couldn't be overloaded. Right?
The method has to be a separate method. The URL or the URI can be the same.
But the normal rules of method overloading still apply.
Because when you request a URI, you don't just say, give me the URI. You also say, here's the verb that I'm using. It's get. You also say, here's the line type that I want that I can set.
Which is all in your annotation.
Yes. Yes. Now, I could have done it with the same method by passing in HTTP context or context. If I passed in the header parameters, I could have read that it wanted that from within the method and returned a variable. I don't think that there's any benefit in doing that. So yeah, technically it's possible, but why would you want to when you can handle it through annotations? There's another way that I strayed away from using REST, and that is, let's go back to my README. If you look here, if I want to delete a member, well, unless I do some JavaScript foo, I can't, with HTML, send a delete request to the server. The only thing I can send is post or a get. So as a workaround, just to be able to show that it can be done, I used a query param where it says the method equals delete. And so this is very unrestful too. Let's verify that it works. Okay, we have our members. Who do we want to delete? Let's delete Paul. Now Paul's gone. And you'll see he's gone from all the meetings that he was into. Is that a question?
I was waving goodbye to Paul.
And he was saying in your code you redirect it back to the main page?
Hey, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Good question.
Why did you say that on the previous question about overload?
That wasn't a good
If
question.
they're all good questions.
That was a terrible question. Okay, so when I delete a member, and where is my delete member?
Member resource?
Do this.
Member string.
What is going on? Here we go. In the get member, it's a get request, and I just pass in a query parameter, which I pass in here a URI param ID.
It's kind of who's on first to use get and then.
And if I pass in delete, it does this. Here I'm not returning a string, I'm returning a response. A response is just it's where you can access more than just the content. So when I get down here, I'm building a string for if they're not deleting anything, and then I just go to the response, say builder, okay, put the string in there, and spit it out. But if I do have to delete something, I say response builder, temporary redirect. It's a convenience method for setting stuff in the headers and sending it back to the builder and saying, hey, redirect to this page.
What about the redirect page? What is the temporary on the redirect?
Well, it's not. If it was a permanent redirect, I believe, one, it's a status code that you send back, and if it wasn't meant to be temporary, then whenever somebody went to members or a member, it would think that they wanted to go to all the members instead of just that ID. Does that make sense?
I think it's a hint to the client that the URI that the request is no longer valid or has moved to a permanent location, so they should update their bookmarks with the new location. Temporary redirect is temporary.
Let's kill Ryan. You see, here's his page. He likes movies with Eric Schultz. Don't ask me what that's about.
That's a business one.
And his URL is just example 3 member, and then his user ID. And if I hover over delete this member, you see we've added method equals delete. So if that wasn't a temporary redirect, then whenever I went to this URL for Ryan, so if we added them back in later, it would redirect back to the members. I don't know. There wasn't a convenience method for permanent redirect. I assume
Is there one that you can just give it a response code?
What's that?
Is there one you can just give it a response code?
Yeah.
You can just do that then.
Maybe that is just called redirect.
It may just be called redirect. They have an API to make this stuff up. And it is. Not on my machine. That's on my work machine. Oh, let's add one. One thing that I did add to this from the read-only was the ability to add a member to Jason. Jason, what do you like?
Puppies?
Everyone loves puppies.
Oh.
You hate cats?
Sure. I was going to say My Little Pony. It's not working.
We've added Jason. How did that happen?
Post?
Yeah, we did a post. And get my repeat. Where's the post? Here's the post. If I go to member and I post to this collection of members, it creates a new one, and I believe it returns to that URL. I could have redirected to the URL for the member. I could have redirected this, but I didn't. And if we want to see what that code looks like, I believe it was called add member. And there it is. Here's where I spit out a form with my string buffer. Makes you want to use string buffers though, just all over the place. All that nice repetitive code in there. And it says it's posting, and it doesn't give a target to post to, so it posts right back to where it came from, which then calls this method, which responds to the post command, where I just create a member, call the service, add them, and then I don't even do a redirect. I just spit out, since we're in the same URL, just spit out the value that they would have gotten if they'd gone to this up here.
Now, are there annotations to facilitate pulling out those post values, the form values, or do you have to do it through that form object?
I think that there's not annotations. There's an object that you can pass in that will pull out form values.
But you have to do that manually. You can't, like, with the query param just annotates a parameter or URI parameter, I think was annotation. See what I'm getting at, where it does it for you?
Yeah, there's not that I know of.
Okay.
I don't think there is. And I think the intention is not to use those very much. I think that what I've done here, we can show it with the browser and whip something together real fast, but where this really would shine is if you had this is just your data model, and you spit out JavaScript so that you could write a client in JavaScript and have it be separate. You could write a client in Java and you've got a strict separation there, and maybe you're spitting out XML at that point. Or maybe you're spitting out microforms. Let's see if I'm finished here. Entity providers, criticisms and suggestions. There's only one reference implementation. There's only one implementation that I know of. This guy is a I guess a well-known person around JBoss circles. He posted a few things that he'd do differently if he were doing a reference implementation and actually threatened to do one. They were, for example, our HTTP method get. You have to pass in the method itself. He didn't like that. He didn't like having magic method names, so he'd like to get rid of that. It's too verbose, and he'd like to get rid of a separate URI template annotation and just combine them all together with an @get and the path. That's more of a convenience thing, changing your life. You wanted to add an @location annotation, and that's for your temporary redirects. It's pretty common to add something to a collection and then send them off somewhere else. And rather than do that programmatically, you can just put it in an annotation.
Yeah.
He wanted to allow EL expressions in the templates rather than an ID or what was he getting at there? He was actually showing them in the location. If you wanted to send somebody to a location and it was a variable place, so rather than having to pass in a whole object, you could pass in O.ID rather than just O. An XML descriptor, he didn't like being forced to use annotations and that limiting it to Java 5. And he would have liked to have seen a client-side framework to be able to use all this. One of the reasons why you have kind of a bastardized example here is because I didn't want to write a client. That was too much work. I'm sure there's a lot. I don't know. I hope he jumps in and that'll help guide the JSR to make it better over time, I believe. And that is it. Are there any questions? Okay. Now listen to Ryan after this, and you'll want to use REST.
I want to use
Remember,
this is cool
to do it.
That's not a question, that's a comment. This is